Hey everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Title Scoop. This week we're going to talk about access. So our standard owners and loan policies insure against the lack of a right of access to and from the land, and that's covered risk number 4. And it doesn't matter if you're issuing the 2006 or the new 2021 forms, that covered risk didn't change. So it assures that a right of access is there. It does not assure that it's convenient or even that you can get to it by vehicle or pedestrian access. So for a right of access to exist, you're usually going to see one of three things. It's either your property is going to abut a public street, road, or highway, or it's going to abut a street within a subdivision that has access to a public street or road, or it's going to have a recorded easement. So we're going to go over a few cases that have happened just so you can have some examples of access issues that have come up in our industry. So probably one of the most famous cases that ever came out on access was Gates versus Chicago Title. And in this case, Mr. Gates bought some land in New Mexico, about 480 acres, and when he bought it, he had access via East Road. Now, for about 18 months, he used it, and then the owners of East Road decided to barricade it, and Mr. Gates no longer had access. So he filed suit. Well, the title company came back and said, actually, Mr. Gates, you do have access via West Road. And in the testimony, Mr. Gates came out and said that West Road was indescribable and a goat path. So yes, an animal, the goat, a goat path. There was no question that Mr. Gates what abutted a public street, which was West Road. But the court held that the policy ensures only the right of access, not a convenient route. And in fact, it's the insured's responsibility, not the insurer's, to go out and make sure that that route is actually passable. So similarly, there have been cases where logging roads have been found to be access to hunting ground or forested areas. There was a case in Florida, I believe, that was beachfront property, and there was access, but it was covered in water about half the year. And the court said it doesn't matter. You have legal access to your property, even if it does get covered half the year. And then in a fairly recent case in New York, there was a piece of property that abutted a public road, and the road was about 30 feet below grade, and there was a retaining wall that went along the entire length of the property and the road. And the court actually came and said the title policy provided refers to the absence of a legal right to access and does not cover claims concerning lack of an existing means of physical access. So even though the people couldn't necessarily use the access, it was there, and it wasn't the title insurer's job to give them how they were going to use that access. So it's important to note that our policy excludes issues relating to zoning or subdivisions. And so the easiest way to kind of think of this is there was a case in California, and the court held that there was legal access to the abutting road, although the subdivision restrictions prevented the owner from actually getting a driveway permit. So what I would say on this is if you see a restriction and it does have something that's going to cause an issue for access or for someone trying to have access to their property, you do want to call that out as an exception. Obviously, we don't know everything, but definitely it's best practice to put that down if you see it within the restrictions. So the last thing we're going to talk about is easements. Now, easements need to be in writing and recorded, and those are going to be on the servient and the dominant estate. So the servients are burdened, and this dominant is your benefit estate. If you have an easement, you have to search both pieces of property because you need to go back to the time when the easement was drafted and recorded and make sure that everyone's interests were signed off on that easement. And also if there's any priorities over, so maybe there's a mortgage or some type of lien or taxes, those have to be called out. The other thing is if you don't have access on your property, you really need to make sure, one, that you call it out on the commitment, but that you do something about it. So land that doesn't have legal access is considered landlocked. That's the term we use. And we generally, it's not a difficult fix. It's often that we're just going to get an easement agreement or an easement signed by the proper parties in order to have access to the property. So I have a couple claims I remember. One, it was a few years ago, and a guy bought 2 tracts of land, Lot A and Lot B, and the only way to get to Lot B was through Lot A. Well, then he sold Lot A, and then he tried to sell Lot B, but then the owner of Lot A was like, you know what? I actually don't want you to have access anymore if you're selling it. And so it became an issue. Another one I remember is 2 people lived side by side in the country. They shared a driveway. Let's call them East owner and West owner. And so West owner had the driveway on their property. East owner didn't, but utilized it to get to their property. And East owner started making some really smelly food like every single day, and West owner got tired of it. So they put a big barricade up, and East owner no longer could access their property. And the moral of that story is don't buy a property unless there's an easement recorded that actually works to your benefit. So that's it for this week. If you guys have any questions, let me know. We'll see you next week.